runs his own investment firm downtown. You should see the apartment he lives in. It's right next to the Space Needle. Her father, David, a retired philosophy professor, raised a brow, setting down his spoon with a quiet clink. Investment firm, you say? What kind of investments? Stocks, cryptos, real estate too, Emily said proudly. David folded his hands, leaning forward slightly. That's the part that concerns me, Em. No one should be making that kind of promise this early. Has he shown you his actual work? His finances? Does he have verifiable clients? Dad, I'm not a child. I'm 26. I have a career. I know how to judge people. But do you? David asked softly, his voice more pained than judgmental. Emily stood up abruptly, chair scraping the floor. I came here to share good news, not get interrogated. I thought maybe, for once, you'd both trust me. She stormed out of the kitchen, filled with glass surfaces, LED lights, and expensive-looking decor. But something about it felt staged. Kevin walked in, tossing his blazer onto a chair and grinning. How'd it go with the parentals? Emily hesitated. They're not thrilled. They think it's too fast. Kevin chuckled, walking over with 2 glasses of wine. Parents are always like that. Old school. My mom used to say the same about my dad. Still got divorced after 10 years, so what do they know? She took the glass reluctantly. I just wish they could see what I see in you. Well, they'll have to see it from the wedding pictures, he said with a smirk, settling beside her. Besides, once we're married and living in our own place, all of this will fade away. Emily leaned into him, trying to push down the flicker of doubt. Maybe her parents were being too harsh. Maybe they just couldn't see how special Kevin was. She reminded herself that love was about taking risks. Her whole life had been about playing it safe. A week later, the Tran home was quiet. Linda sat by the window, knitting, while David stared at the newspaper without really reading it. She's serious this time, Linda said quietly. She's already looking at wedding venues. David didn't look up. I know. Do we go? Or? He folded the paper neatly. If we go, we're condoning it. If we don't, we risk losing her completely. Linda blinked back tears. I wish she could feel what I feel. I don't know why, but something about that man unsettles me. David looked out the window, his eyes heavy. Because we're parents. And sometimes we can see the storm long before the first drop falls. A quiet whisper. A warning she hadn't wanted to hear. Chapter 2. The cracks in the perfect picture. The first month of marriage felt like an Instagram highlight reel. Emily posted pictures of their date nights, perfectly plated dinners Kevin claimed to have made, though they were mostly takeout, and the luxury car he borrowed from a friend, pretending it was his. To the outside world, they were the couple everyone envied. But behind closed doors, a different picture was beginning to emerge. It started small. The dream apartment in downtown Seattle suddenly had a leaky ceiling. Emily had noticed the building didn't match the one Kevin had shown her during their dating months. When she brought it up, he shrugged. Oh, that place? Nah, I had to let it go. Market downturn. But this one's temporary until we get something better. Trust me. Emily nodded, though unease curled in her stomach. Then came the bills. Unopened envelopes started stacking on the kitchen counter, credit card statements, overdue notices, even an envelope from a debt collection agency. Kevin always brushed them aside. It's just paper. Debt is part of the hustle. Emily tried to joke one night, you sure you're not just hustling debt? Kevin didn't laugh. In fact, he snapped. You think I don't know what I'm doing? You've got no idea how the market works. You've been playing it safe your whole life, working that tiny office job, following your parents' rules. I'm trying to build something big here, and all you can do is nag. The words hit her like ice water. It was the first time he raised his voice. She apologized, unsure why she even did. Somehow, she felt guilty for asking questions she had every right to ask. That night, Kevin stayed out late, said he was meeting a client. He came home past midnight, reeking of alcohol. When Emily asked if everything was okay, he waved her off and stumbled into bed, still in his clothes. Over the following weeks, Emily noticed a pattern. Kevin wasn't working, at least not in the way she'd expected. His investment firm was just a home office with 2 monitors constantly streaming stock tickers. He spent hours glued to Reddit threads and Discord chats about crypto and day trading. Sometimes he cheered loudly at a sudden gain. But more often, she heard muffled curses and saw him bury his face in his hands. "You lost again?" she asked gently one morning. Kevin slammed his fist on the table. "It's not losing. It's volatility. You wouldn't understand." Money grew tight. The wedding photos hadn't even finished printing, and Emily was already dipping into her personal savings to cover rent and groceries. One afternoon, she received a call from her credit card company. "Hi, Miss Tran, we're calling to confirm a charge of $3,800 made yesterday for online trading software." She froze. "No, I didn't authorize that." After hours of digging and confronting Kevin, he finally admitted to using her card, just temporarily. "You'll get it back. Once this position flips, we're talking 5 times return." Emily's voice trembled. "You lied to me." He grabbed his keys. "You knew who I was. You just didn't want to see it." By month 3, Emily was no longer pretending. She stopped posting on social media. She deleted the wedding album from her phone. The glow had faded, and reality had crept in like an uninvited guest. Her friends started asking questions. She came home to find Kevin hunched over the kitchen table, surrounded by crumpled beer cans and his laptop. He looked up, eyes bloodshot. "I need more capital." Emily stared at him. "You mean more of my money?" He stood up. "It's ours now, isn't it? We're married." "No," she said softly, "not like this." A silence passed. Then, like a switch flipping, Kevin slammed his palm against the wall. "You think you can threaten me now? After everything I've done for you?" She stepped back instinctively. For a moment, she didn't recognize the man in front of her. He saw her fear and scoffed. "You're just like your parents." That night, Emily packed a small bag and slept at her friend Sarah's apartment. 2 weeks passed. She hadn't gone home. She hadn't told her parents. Shame clung to her like a shadow. She sat alone in a coffee shop one afternoon, staring at her untouched latte. Across the room, a young couple laughed over a shared pastry. The woman wore no makeup, no expensive jewelry, but her smile was bright, genuine. Emily looked down at her own hands. Her wedding ring was still there, but it felt like a chain. That evening, she removed it. Quietly. Finally, and for the first time in months, she cried. Not because she missed Kevin, but because she missed herself. Chapter 3. But Emily could feel the question in the air every time Sarah brought her tea or folded her laundry. It hovered between them like fog. What happened to your marriage? She wasn't ready to say it. Not yet. To speak it out loud would make it too real. One afternoon, her mother called. Emily stared at the screen, frozen. The name Mom flashed with gentle persistence, as if it were knocking on her heart, softly but insistently. She let it ring out. And again the next day. And the one after. She couldn't bring herself to answer. What would she say? That she had made a terrible mistake? That everything her parents had feared had turned out to be true? That she had walked away from love and wisdom and home for what? A man with debts, lies. How her mother had stood silently at the edge of the venue, but left before the ceremony began. She had thought they were being stubborn. Now she saw they were being protective. And she had ignored them. One evening, Sarah came home with a grocery bag and placed it gently on the kitchen counter. I ran into your mom, she said carefully. She was at the market. Emily stiffened. What did she say? She asked how you were. That's all. She didn't pressure me. Emily swallowed hard. She hates me. Sarah's eyes softened. She doesn't. She's just waiting. She doesn't want to hurt you more. I hurt them first. Emily. Sarah sat beside her. You didn't hurt them. You made a choice. A wrong one, maybe, but it doesn't mean love disappears. It just gets buried under the pain. But it's still there. Emily looked down, her throat tight. I don't know how to face them. Sarah placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to say anything perfect. Just go home. That night, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Rain tapped gently on the windowpane. Somewhere deep in her chest, something cracked, like a thin sheet of ice breaking over running water. She picked up her phone and, for the first time in weeks, opened her family group chat. No new messages. Just the last one from her father, sent the day after the wedding. We still love you. Always. Her thumb hovered over the screen, trembling. Then, she typed, Can I come home? It was 2:14 a.m. It was her father. We never closed the door. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Later that morning, she packed her suitcase again, but this time with a quiet sense of purpose. No running. No hiding. Just a slow, painful return to the truth. Sarah offered to drive her, but Emily shook her head. I need to do this alone. She took the bus to the house she'd grown up in. The trees lining the street were beginning to change color, their leaves a patchwork of gold and orange, autumn creeping in. As she stepped off the bus, the familiar path felt strangely distant. She paused at the door, raised her hand, and knocked. It was her mother who opened the door. Linda looked thinner, older, but her eyes, those gentle, fierce eyes, filled with tears the moment they met Emily's. There were no dramatic gasps, no anger, no blame, just arms open, trembling, waiting. Emily stepped forward and was enveloped in her mother's embrace, and for the first time in months, she let herself sob. She felt her father's hand on her back, steady and firm. We're here, Emily. She thought it might have all been a dream. Kevin, the wedding, the pain, all of it. But the dull ache in her chest reminded her it was real. She sat up slowly. On the nightstand beside her was a folded towel, a small glass of orange juice, and a sticky note in her mother's careful handwriting. No need to explain. Just rest, Mom. Offering small gestures of normalcy. Her father sometimes sat on the porch with his coffee, occasionally glancing at her but never pressing her to talk. Emily didn't know how to process that. She had expected anger, coldness, I told you so speeches. Instead, she received acceptance. It made her cry even more. On the 5th day, she joined her father outside on the porch. The sun was low in the sky, casting golden light through the maple tree that had been there since before she was born. He passed her a cup of tea. They sat for a while, watching the neighborhood kids ride bikes up and down the street. After a long pause, he finally said, Your mother wanted to throw her shoes at the TV when we saw your wedding photos. Emily laughed softly despite herself. I almost did too, she admitted. David glanced sideways. You don't owe us anything, Em. But if you want to talk, I'm here. She nodded slowly. I thought I knew what I was doing. He said nothing. I thought love was about showing people they're wrong. That I could prove I was right just by being happy. David sipped his tea. Emily wiped her face with her sleeve. I kept thinking if I just tried harder, if I stayed supportive, he would change. But it just got worse. David nodded quietly. You start by picking up the pieces of yourself, one by one. Later that night, Emily opened her old laptop and looked at her resume. It had been over 3 months since she'd worked. Her email inbox was overflowing with unanswered messages from her old boss, colleagues, even a few recruiters. But she hadn't been able to face them, too ashamed, too broken. Now, she opened a blank document and began to write. Not an email, a journal entry, I thought I was walking into a fairy tale, but I lost myself in a nightmare. And now I'm standing in the ashes, trying to find what's still worth saving. She didn't write for an audience, just for herself. And the act of doing it, putting it into words, felt like stitching a torn seam in her soul. The next day, she met Sarah for coffee. Her friend's eyes filled with tears as soon as she saw her. "You look lighter." Emily smiled faintly. "I think I finally exhaled." They talked for hours. About Kevin. When I couldn't even be there for myself. That evening, her mother surprised her with an old box from the attic. Inside were drawings Emily had made in high school, journals, awards, postcards from her study abroad year in Paris. "These," Linda said softly, "are reminders of the girl you were before you forgot." Emily traced a photo of herself at age 15, bright-eyed, holding a trophy at a debate competition. "I want to be her again," she whispered. Her mother smiled. "You're already on your way." Later that night, as she sat by the window with a cup of tea, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. It was small, barely a flicker, but it was hers. Not because someone gave it to her, but because she had started to find it again, within herself. Chapter 5. The Voice That Returned. The first time Emily opened her work email again, her hands shook. She had put it off for too long, dreading the judgment, the pity, the questions. But something had shifted inside her in recent days. She no longer felt the need to hide. She didn't need to wear shame like a cloak. She had survived something painful, and that survival deserved more than silence. So she logged in. The inbox loaded slowly, as if weighing the heaviness of what waited there. Over 200 unread messages. Some were newsletters. Others were company-wide updates. But a few were personal. "Emily, hope you're well. Your voice is missed on the content team." Jason, copy chief. "Hey I heard you took some time off. Just checking in. If you need a project to ease back in, I've got a client who's been asking for you." Claire, former manager. She leaned back in her chair. They hadn't forgotten her. She hadn't vanished. She replied carefully, thoughtfully, to each one. No elaborate explanations. Just a soft reintroduction of the voice she thought she'd lost. Over the next few days, she began writing again, not just in journals, but for small freelance gigs her old team forwarded her way. It felt awkward at first. Her fingers stumbled over words that once flowed so naturally. But then, something clicked. One afternoon, while editing a piece about sustainable fashion trends, she found herself smiling, not at the subject matter, but at the sense of clarity that returned. Her mind was sharp. Her instincts intact. Her voice, tentative but true, was coming back. She hadn't lost herself. She had just been buried under someone else's noise. One evening, her father knocked gently on her door. "Thought you might want this," he said, handing her a small wrapped package. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, the cover soft and worn. On the first page, in his neat handwriting, he had written, "For your second beginning. Love, Dad." Emily's throat tightened. "Thank you." He nodded, not needing to say more. That weekend, the financial guru who always had a new opportunity, a new pitch, a new vision. Emily was smart. Too smart, honestly. But she was also idealistic, longing for something big, romantic. Any form of control and trauma. We try to tell their stories through compassion and dignity, not pity. Emily swallowed hard. "I've never written for something like that." "You've lived something like that," the woman said gently. "That's why your voice matters." That night, Emily sat at her desk, reading through survivor testimonials, each one a mirror reflecting pieces of her own journey. A woman who stayed for her children. A man who was manipulated into financial ruin. A young college student who lost all sense of identity in a toxic relationship. Emily's hands trembled as she typed the first draft for the new campaign. We don't always recognize the moment we start losing ourselves. Sometimes it's not a slap. Sometimes it's a silence. A cold look. A manipulation so subtle we mistake it for love. She stopped, breathed, and wrote more. Over the next week, Emily poured herself into the project. She met with counselors, interviewed survivors, and collaborated with graphic designers. Each day she returned home exhausted, but in a way that left her full, not empty. Her parents noticed the change. Her mother, Linda, brought her tea one evening. "You look tired." Emily smiled. "The good kind. Like after a long hike." Linda hesitated before asking, "Do you ever think about him?" "Sometimes," Emily said honestly. "But less with pain now. More with clarity." Linda nodded and sat beside her. "I wish I had spoken differently back then. More gently. Maybe you would have listened." Emily shook her head. "You were right. I just wasn't ready to hear it." One Saturday morning, Emily received a message from her old boss at the marketing agency. "We're relaunching a lifestyle campaign. Your name came up. Want to come back as senior editor?" She reread the message 3 times. It was everything she had once worked for. But now she hesitated. Later that afternoon, she sat with her father on the porch again. He listened carefully. David smiled. "Then follow her. She seems wiser than the last one." Emily laughed through a tear. She's been through a lot. And she's still standing. Meanwhile, Kevin sat across from a job recruiter in a cold, bare office with buzzing fluorescent lights. The woman scanned his resume. "Mr. Din, your experience is unconventional." Kevin shifted uncomfortably. "I've been in finance. I ran my own firm." "There are no tax records of that firm," the recruiter replied calmly. He said nothing. "We might be able to place you in an entry-level call center. Would that interest you?" His pride screamed no, but his reality nodded. "I'll take it," he said. 2 lives, once entwined by illusion, now unraveling in opposite directions. One crumbling toward consequence. The other walking slowly, bravely, into light. Chapter 7. The Other Side of Forgiveness. Emily stood in front of the tall mirror in her old bedroom, adjusting the collar of her blouse. It wasn't a special outfit, just a soft, simple button-up with a navy cardigan, but there was something deliberate about how she wore it. Calm, grounded, whole. She had been invited to speak at a small panel organized by the nonprofit she now worked with, an event titled Reclaiming Voice, Healing After Hidden Abuse. It wasn't publicized widely. Just a small community gathering at a library near Capitol Hill. A dozen chairs. A quiet podium. Nothing flashy. But for Emily, it was monumental. It would be the first time she said out loud what she had only whispered to herself in journals. At the event, she waited quietly in the back as 2 other speakers shared their stories, a young man who had been isolated by a manipulative partner. And promises aren't protection when they come from people who don't even know how to care for themselves. She told them about Kevin without venom, without shame. She described the honeymoon phase, the gaslighting, the growing weight of silence, the credit cards, the manipulation, the night she packed her things and walked away. And finally, she told them about the letter. "How do you forgive someone who stole parts of you?" she asked aloud. No one answered. But everyone listened. "I used to think forgiveness was for him," she said quietly. "But it's not. It's for me. It's the choice not to carry his mistakes as part of my identity." After the talk, people came up to her, some with hugs, some with teary eyes, some with nothing more than a hand gently squeezed against hers. One woman whispered, "Thank you. I haven't told anyone, but now I think I can." That night, Emily returned home to find her parents still awake, sitting in the living room with the TV muted. "How did it go?" her mom asked softly. Emily sat between them. "Good. Hard, but good." David turned toward her. "We're proud of you, Em." She looked down, the words striking deeper than she expected. "I didn't think I'd ever be someone who helped others. Linda smiled gently. Her laughter returned, gradually, then suddenly. She no longer cringed at wedding photos. She no longer counted months since the divorce. She simply lived. One Sunday afternoon, she and her mother visited a small second-hand bookstore near the university campus. As they browsed through aisles of weathered novels and vintage cookbooks, Linda paused and turned to Emily. Would you ever consider writing a book? Emily raised an eyebrow. About what? About your story. About women like you. It could help more people than just the ones in the room. Emily smiled thoughtfully. Maybe one day, when I'm ready. You're already writing the first chapters, her mom said. Emily looked at her, eyes misty. I guess I am. That evening, Teresa looked at her for a long moment. You've been through it too, haven't you? Emily nodded. Yes, but I'm not just what happened to me. Neither are you. That night, Emily revisited her old favorite songs. Not the ones she had pretended to like for Kevin. Not the ones he played in the background while day trading and ignoring her questions. Real ones. The kind she danced to barefoot in her dorm room. The ones that made her feel like the world was still soft and full of possibility. She sang along to them quietly, windows open. As the evening breeze moved through the curtains, her parents passed by the door and smiled. On Saturday morning, Emily met up with Sarah for brunch. She hadn't been there in years, used to love it when she first moved to Seattle. The smell of candles, roasted coffee, and lavender soap drifted in the breeze as she wandered past the booths. She stopped at one table with handcrafted jewelry. A delicate silver necklace with a tiny compass charm caught her eye. The vendor, a smiling woman in her 50s, said, "That one's called True North. It's meant for people trying to find direction again." Emily bought it without hesitation. At home, she placed the necklace on her nightstand beside her notebook. She didn't wear it for style. She wore it for what it reminded her. That she had a direction now. And it pointed inward, not outward. Weeks passed, and with them came a growing sense of steadiness. Emily began outlining her book. Just notes for now, chapter titles, story beats, reflections. She didn't know if it would ever be published, but she knew it needed to be written. Each night, she added a little more. One evening, her father came into the room, holding a box. "I thought you might want this," he said. Inside were old journals Emily had written during college, forgotten beneath the attic insulation and dust. She flipped through pages filled with idealistic hopes, silly poetry, deep insecurities, and bursts of defiance. One entry stopped her. "One day, I want to be strong enough to choose myself, even if it means walking away from someone I once believed in." She had written that at age 19. She placed her hand over the page, eyes closed. That girl had been speaking to her all along. That weekend. At home that evening, Emily stood by her window as rain rolled down the glass. The sky was quiet and gray. She sipped her tea, wearing her compass necklace, notebook open beside her. She wrote, Chapter 9, A New Way to Love. The holiday lights had begun to appear around Seattle. Storefronts shimmered in gold and silver. Twinkling bulbs lined fences, and evergreen wreaths appeared on front doors. Emily usually found this time of year overwhelming. Too much noise, too many expectations. But this winter felt different. It was quiet, not lonely, but peaceful. She didn't feel pressured to smile for pictures, attend every party, or post curated photos of holiday joy. Instead, she found herself savoring the slower things. Evening walks in the crisp air, helping her mom decorate the tree, reading novels by the fireplace with a blanket over her knees. There was a calm that came from finally being honest with herself. One Sunday afternoon, as she returned from the farmer's market, her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "You still coming to dinner next week? My cousin's in town. I think you'd like him." Eyes. Emily rolled her eyes, smiling. Sarah had tried to set her up several times before, all with mixed results. "Yes, I'll come. but no promises. He's normal. I swear. Dinner was at a small Italian place near Green Lake. Candlelit, cozy, with an aroma of roasted tomatoes and warm bread that made the cold melt away. Sarah was already there, waving frantically from the back table. "Emily, this is Daniel," she said, scooting aside. Daniel stood up and extended a hand. "Hey, good to meet you." He had kind eyes. That was the first thing she noticed, not the suit, not his height, not his smile. The eyes. They were calm. And they didn't linger too long. No calculated charm. No rehearsed lines. Just a person. Present. Conversation was easy, no pressure, no forced laughter. Daniel was a software developer, recently moved back to Seattle from Portland. He volunteered at an animal shelter on weekends. And when Sarah briefly mentioned Emily's work with survivors, he didn't ask intrusive questions. Just nodded and said, "That sounds meaningful." After dinner, Daniel walked Emily to her car. "It was really nice talking to you," he said. She smiled. "Yeah, it was." He didn't ask for her number. He didn't lean in. He just said, "I hope I'll see you again," and left it at that. They just welcomed her. At midnight, fireworks lit up the sky over the hilltop. Emily and Daniel stood side by side, watching the sparks fall. He glanced at her. "So, new year. New story?" She looked at him, then at the sky. "No," she said. "Same story. Just finally turning the page." He smiled. And this time, when he reached for her hand, she didn't flinch. She held it back. Not tightly. Not desperately. Just, honestly. Chapter 10, where healing begins. The new year unfolded quietly. There were no big declarations, no vision boards, no bucket lists taped to the wall. Emily's resolutions weren't loud. They were private intentions whispered only to herself. Stay soft. Stay honest. Choose peace over perfection. "I always thought healing meant you had to go back to who you were before the pain," he said. "But I think maybe it means becoming someone new. Someone braver." Emily took a deep breath. "I don't want to be who I was before, Kevin." That girl ignored her instincts to be liked. She tolerated red flags just to feel chosen. Daniel looked at her. "And who are you now?" She paused. "That sounds simple." It's not. Listening is hard, especially when your pride wants to speak louder. But your mother and we don't treat love like a performance. We treat it like a practice. Emily nodded slowly. "I never had that with Kevin. I thought love meant proving myself." David smiled sadly. "Real love doesn't demand that you shrink to fit someone else's story. It invites you to expand into your own." Later that evening, Emily sat down with her mother, flipping through old family photo albums. They laughed at the ridiculous hairstyles, cringed at awkward teenage outfits, and smiled at captured moments from camping trips, piano recitals, and late-night birthday cakes. "Do you ever regret not pushing harder when I was with Kevin?" Emily asked suddenly. Linda looked at her daughter. "I think about it sometimes. But then I remind myself love is not control. You had to see it for yourself. And even though it hurt, you came back stronger." Emily took her mother's hand. "Thank you for not saying I told you so." Her mother squeezed gently. "That's not what you needed. You needed someone waiting at the door." February rolled in with early hints of spring. The mornings were still cold, but buds began appearing on the trees. The air smelled different, like something ready to bloom. So was Emily. "I'd read it." She smiled. "Even the messy parts?" "Especially the messy parts. That's where the truth lives." Emily looked up at the sky, a crescent moon glowing softly. "I think I'm finally ready." Led workshops. But this was different. This time, she wasn't representing a nonprofit. She was representing herself. The book had started slowly, just scribbles and bullet points. But once she stopped trying to make it perfect, it grew. Every chapter came with tears. Every edit came with doubt. Yet she persisted. 6 months ago, She had sent the final manuscript to a small independent press that focused on survivor-centered narratives. Now, just a few weeks later, she held the first printed copy in her hands. What Love Wasn't: A Story of Unlearning, by Emily Tran. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. It was real. The event opened with a brief introduction from the librarian hosting the series, then a reading from another local author. Finally, it was Emily's turn. She stood behind the small podium, heart calm, not empty, but steady. "I never expected to write a book," she began, eyes scanning the modest audience. "I thought my story was too ordinary, too quiet. But pain doesn't need to be loud to be real." She read a short passage from her book about the night she left Kevin. It became something else. A teenage girl in a hoodie raised her hand. "What would you say to someone who's still stuck? Who hasn't left yet?" Emily's voice softened. "I'd say, your fear is valid. Your doubts are real. But so is your strength. And even if you don't move today or tomorrow, know this: you are not crazy. You are not weak. And you're not alone." After the event, attendees lingered. Some came to thank her. Others asked for hugs. A few simply touched her shoulder, unable to speak but needing connection. As Emily packed her things, a man in his 40s approached her. "I read your book," he said. "It helped me understand my sister. She didn't survive her marriage. But now I finally understand why she stayed so long." David handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" "Just something we thought you'd want," he said. She opened it to find a framed photo of her as a child, barefoot, standing in the garden, one hand covered in dirt, the other holding a dandelion. On the back, her mother had written, "You've always been rooted in strength." Emily held it to her chest. For so long, she had felt like a tree that had been chopped down. But now she was growing again. The next morning, Daniel met her at their favorite cafe near the water. They sat near the window, sipping their drinks. "I heard your reading was a success," he said. "It was more than I expected," Emily replied. He reached across the table, lightly brushing her hand. "You deserve every bit of that." They sat in silence for a while, watching seagulls land on the pier, couples strolling with dogs, boats bobbing gently in the harbor. Then Daniel said something she hadn't expected. "I love you." Emily turned to him, heart stilling. There was no music swelling, no butterflies. Just the calm truth of it. She took a breath. "I'm not ready to say it back," she said quietly. "Not because I don't feel something, but because I want the words to come from a place that's full, not afraid." Daniel nodded, unshaken. "I wasn't asking for them. I was just giving them to you." Her chest ached, in the best way. This was what it meant to be seen. That evening, she walked by herself to the lake. The sky was streaked with gold. Ducks drifted along the surface, and the wind brushed softly across her cheeks. She stood by the water's edge and whispered a quiet goodbye to the version of herself who once begged for breadcrumbs of affection. The girl who thought pain was proof of love. And the woman who now knew better. Because healing wasn't an endpoint. It was a path. And tonight, she was taking the first step forward. Chapter 12. The woman who walked away and came home. The rain was soft that morning, misty, the kind that clung to everything like breath on glass. Emily stood outside the old apartment building she hadn't seen since the night she left it behind. The cracked sidewalk, the flickering porch light, the rust-colored mailbox that never closed right, it was all still there, untouched by the time that had passed inside her. She hadn't planned to return. She didn't need closure. She wasn't seeking revenge. But when the landlord, Mr. Hanley, called to say there were still a few items left in the storage locker with her name on them, she had agreed to come. Now, standing here with keys in her pocket and the past curled somewhere between her ribs, she felt ready. Not for answers, but for release. The storage unit was down a short hall in the basement, damp and musty, with the scent of old cardboard and mildew. The light above buzzed faintly as she turned the key. Inside were a few forgotten boxes. A tea kettle she had bought during their first month of marriage. A picture frame with a photo of her and Kevin, smiling at a lake, both pretending. She didn't flinch this time. She just looked at it for a long second, then placed it face down. She found a box labeled Emily, old journals, and smiled faintly. She had thought they were lost. She took it under her arm, along with a worn quilt her mother had given her years ago. That was all. She left the rest behind. Back in her car, she sat in silence for a few moments before pulling out her phone. There were no missed calls, no new messages from Kevin. And for the first time, that absence didn't sting. It simply meant, the door is closed. Later that week, Emily shared part of her return in a new blog post. It wasn't dramatic, just a reflection. Sometimes healing means returning to the scene of your own silence, not to dwell, but to gather the parts of yourself that you left behind. We don't go back to stay. We go back to retrieve what was ours. I am not the woman who ran. I am the woman who walked away and came home. Her readers responded in droves. Hundreds of messages. Women saying, "That's me." She reread the email and said yes. The night before the event, she sat with her notebook, reflecting. It had been almost 2 years since the day she left Kevin. 2 years since she had returned home in silence, unsure if she'd be welcomed back. Now she had a life rooted not in approval, but in truth. A job she loved, a voice she trusted, a relationship that nourished, parents who stood beside her with pride, not conditions. She still had fears. She still had moments of doubt. But now she knew how to walk through them. At the summit, she stepped on stage to a quiet crowd of 300 people. Survivors, therapists, advocates, students, strangers who had become community. She opened her speech simply. When I left my marriage, I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I couldn't stay. I thought walking away was weakness. But it was the bravest thing I've ever done. She shared not just her pain, but her growth. She spoke not as a victim, not even just as a survivor, but as a whole woman. Afterward, as the crowd applauded, someone handed her a single white rose. The same kind that man had placed on her table after her book launch months before. Emily stared at it and smiled. Chapter 13. Becoming the author of her life. Emily woke before sunrise. The sky outside her window was still a deep shade of navy, the first hints of dawn barely visible beyond the trees. She sat on the edge of her bed, the world hushed and slow, and listened to the quiet rhythm of her breath. On the nightstand sat her second manuscript, printed, edited, and ready to send. The title on the cover read, After the Leaving. What Comes Next? By Emily Tran. This one wasn't about Kevin. Not directly. It was about everything after. What happens once you survive. The in-between. The part no one teaches you how to navigate. Rebuilding your identity. Finding safe love. Sitting with your loneliness. Accepting joy without guilt. Falling apart again, and still choosing to show up. It was the story she wished someone had written for her. Now it was hers to give. Later that morning, she walked to the post office with the package tucked under her arm. She didn't rush. The sky had turned a pale gold and birds chattered in the bare trees above. Life was ordinary and beautiful. She slipped the package into the mailing bin and stood still for a moment. No applause. No cameras. No spotlight. Just a woman who had written her way out of a past that no longer defined her. That afternoon, she met Daniel at a small indie bookstore where she was scheduled to do a reading for a group of college students studying creative nonfiction. They arrived early and wandered through the shelves. Daniel paused at a display featuring her book. Still surreal? He asked, smiling. Emily ran her fingers over the cover. A little. but not in the "I can't believe it" way anymore. More like, "Yes, this is where I belong." He squeezed her hand. "You've become the author of your own life." She turned to him. "That's exactly how it feels." During the reading, one student raised her hand and asked, "How did you stop being angry?" Emily took a moment before answering. "I didn't," she said honestly. "At least, not right away. I let myself be angry. I let myself mourn. I didn't rush forgiveness. I didn't force peace." She paused. "But eventually, I realized anger was costing me more than it was protecting. So I began trading it for boundaries, for purpose, for love. Not perfect love, but real love, starting with myself." That night, Emily curled up on the couch with a blanket and a mug of peppermint tea. Her parents were watching an old movie in the next room, and Daniel was on his way over with dinner. She opened her laptop, not to work, but to journal. There was a time I wanted to be rescued. There was a time I believed someone else would rewrite the story for me. But the truth is, the rescue was never coming from outside. It came the moment I picked up the pen. She saved the entry and closed the laptop. Later, over dinner, Daniel said something unexpected. "I got a call from Portland," he said, scooping pasta onto her plate. "My old company offered me a role again. Remote, this time." Emily looked up. "Would you take it?" "Only if it still lets me build a life with you." Her heart caught. "Daniel." He shook his head gently, not asking for anything, just being transparent. "You're my home now. And wherever we decide to go, I want it to be together." She exhaled slowly. This wasn't pressure. It was presence. A man not asking her to become small to fit into his life, but opening his life to fit her dreams, too. The next morning, Emily stood by her window again. She and Daniel visited a small plot of land on the outskirts of the city. "We could build something here," he said, brushing aside tall grass with his foot. "Small, cozy, a place that feels like us." Emily looked out at the open space. The trees, the quiet, the possibility. "I don't want perfect," she said. "I don't either," he replied. "I just want peace. And truth. And someone who doesn't make me question my own worth." He wrapped his arms around her. "You already have all of that." She rested her head against his chest. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was beginning again. She felt like she had arrived. Chapter 14. When you are finally chosen by yourself. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Emily found herself alone at the kitchen table, sifting through an old wooden box filled with keepsakes, ticket stubs, handwritten notes, pressed flowers, and Polaroids from all the versions of her life. Some of them made her smile. Some made her ache. But none made her cry. Not anymore. She no longer feared her past. She had stopped running from it. Instead, she looked at each memory with the eyes of a woman who had survived, healed, and grown not because of what had happened, but in spite of it. There was a photo of her at 23, arms around Kevin, grinning at the edge of Lake Chelan. She held it for a second, then turned it over and wrote in ink. This was a girl trying to believe in something that wasn't real. She deserved better. And now she has it. She folded the photo and slid it into an envelope labeled closure, then sealed it. Later that week, Emily stood before her bathroom mirror, getting ready for a small celebratory dinner with her team at the nonprofit. Her second book had been picked up by a larger publishing house. National distribution. More speaking invitations. A wider platform. But tonight, there would be no speeches. No performances. Just laughter, food, and the people who had walked alongside her long before the spotlight found her. As she applied mascara, she paused, then looked at herself. Not through a critical lens. Not checking for flaws. She just saw herself. The curve of her cheeks. The light in her eyes. The subtle smile. There was a woman in the mirror now who didn't ask for permission to exist. She had chosen herself. Finally, at dinner, surrounded by candles and conversation, one of the junior volunteers, barely 20, asked, "What would you say to someone who's afraid they've missed their chance at a new life?" Emily thought for a moment, then answered quietly, "I'd say, new lives don't arrive fully formed. They come in pieces. A quiet no, a single step away. A moment where you say, this hurts, and I deserve more. That's the beginning." She smiled at the girl. "And beginnings are everywhere. You haven't missed yours." After dinner, Daniel drove her home. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. When they reached her street, he parked but didn't get out right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Emily's breath caught. "Before you panic," he said gently, "it's not what you think." She laughed nervously. "Oh!" He opened the box. Inside was a silver ring, not a diamond, not flashy. Just a simple band with an engraving on the inside. "Come home to yourself." Daniel looked at her. "This isn't a proposal." "Not yet. This is a promise that whatever we build together, it won't ask you to leave behind the woman you've become." Emily stared at the ring. Her heart didn't race with fear. It warmed with recognition. "You've always seen me," she whispered. "Because you finally let yourself be seen," he replied. She slipped the ring on her right hand. It fit perfectly. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily wrote one final entry in the notebook that had seen her through the entire journey. "There is a kind of love that doesn't demand. It doesn't wound. It doesn't perform. It arrives softly and stays gently. I spent so long trying to be chosen. Now I know. The most powerful moment of my life was when I chose myself." 2 days later, she returned to the lake. The same spot she had stood in nearly a year ago, staring into her reflection and wondering how she'd ever rebuild. Now she stood taller. The water shimmered under the sun. Birds chirped from the trees. And for a moment, she simply stood there, hand over her heart, breathing, letting go, welcoming in. She reached into her bag and pulled out the old photo of herself and Kevin, now marked with her message. With one last nod of respect to the girl she once was, she released the photo into the wind. It floated briefly, then disappeared. On the walk home, she passed a bookstore window. There, on the front table, was her book. Not because she chased success, but because she told the truth. She whispered, "I live." Chapter 15. A story still being written. Spring came softly. Cherry blossoms unfurled across Seattle's streets like quiet declarations of renewal, painting the sidewalks with pink confetti. The air turned warmer, softer, a season of becoming. Emily stood by the large window of the nonprofit's new office space, watching as people passed below. She held a cup of tea in her hands and took in the moment, not as something to record, but as something to simply feel. Her life had changed, but it hadn't become grand or cinematic. It had become real. The office now bore her fingerprints, not just in the design of its outreach campaigns or the words she wrote for its monthly newsletters, but in its very spirit. She had helped build a space where women didn't need to have perfect stories to be worthy of safety, of listening, of love. She often told the new volunteers, "We are not here to rescue anyone. We are here to remind people that they are worth saving, especially to themselves." Daniel arrived just before noon, carrying sandwiches from their favorite deli. He kissed her temple before setting the food on her desk. "How's the inbox?" he teased. "Full of readers asking when book 3 is coming," she said, smiling. "I keep telling them I'm still living it." He laughed. "That's fair." She looked at him, a playful glint in her eyes. "Still glad you waited?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "You were always worth the wait." Later that evening, they sat in her parents' backyard, helping string up lights for her father's retirement gathering. Linda brought out lemonade, while David tried not to look emotional as Emily placed his teaching award on the display table. "You've shaped so many lives," she said softly. He looked at her with warmth. "So have you, Emily. And the best part? You're just getting started." As twilight fell, Emily slipped away from the crowd and walked down the small trail behind the house, ending at the same garden she used to read in as a teenager. She knelt down and ran her fingers through the dirt, still cool from spring's hesitant sun. From her coat pocket, she had written it weeks ago and waited for the right time to let it go. "Dear Emily, you survived. You grew. You returned. And most importantly, you began again. I'm proud of you, not because you were strong all the time, but because you were honest about when you weren't. I forgive you. For what you tolerated. For what you believed about yourself. For every time you stayed too long in places that did not deserve you. You are free now. Keep going. Love. Me." She folded it gently, buried it beneath a rosebush, and whispered, "Thank you." That night, in the quiet of her room, Emily opened a new journal. The old one, its pages full, sat closed on the shelf, beside a framed photo of her and her mother, taken just after her first book release. On the first page of the new journal, she wrote, "This story doesn't end with love. It doesn't end with a ring. It doesn't end with applause. It continues with breakfast in a quiet kitchen, with an email from a reader, with a walk by the lake, with an honest conversation, with boundaries, with rest, with laughter. It ends where all the best stories do, in the middle of a life being lived fully. And this time, I'm the one writing it." She closed the notebook, placed it by her bedside, and turned out the light. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and blooming flowers. Inside, Emily dreamed not of rescue or escape or approval. She dreamed of open fields, of steady footsteps, of pages unwritten, and the peace of knowing she would write them all. Chapter 16. The Life You Choose to Build. Approximate 1,000 words. Emily stood in the center of the empty lot. Her mom said from across the room. Emily looked up. "I guess I've just stopped apologizing for it." Linda nodded. "Good. The world needs more women who build without permission." As the house planning moved forward, Emily's days became filled with sketches, budgets, and back-and-forth emails with the builder. But it wasn't overwhelming. Not this time. Every choice, every tile, every doorknob felt like an affirmation. I'm allowed to create a life that reflects who I really am. One afternoon, while choosing kitchen finishes, the builder casually asked, "Do you want double sinks?" It's a popular choice for couples. Emily glanced at Daniel, who smiled and shrugged. "You decide. I do dishes. You do coffee. We're not exactly traditional." She laughed. "Just one sink. Less cleaning. More counter space for plants." Meanwhile, Emily continued mentoring new voices through the nonprofit. One of her ments, a woman named June, had just left a 5-year emotionally abusive relationship. June was still shaky, still unsure whether she had made the right decision. "I miss who I was before him," she said during a session. Emily replied gently, "You didn't lose her. You grew past her. And it's okay if the new you doesn't look the same." "But what if I'm never fully healed?" Emily paused, then said, "Healing isn't a finish line. It's a way of living. And you've already started." June nodded slowly, her eyes misting. As the weeks passed, the lot slowly transformed. Foundations were poured. Wooden frames began to rise. Emily visited nearly every day, documenting the process, not for social media, but for herself. She took a photo on a chilly morning. Just a skeleton of the house, the beams catching the golden light. She captioned it in her journal. "You don't have to be complete to be beautiful. Even in progress, you are home." One night, Emily and Daniel lay on the floor of her current apartment, eating pizza straight from the box, a stack of design samples scattered around them. "I was thinking," Daniel said, "we should carve something into the framing before the drywall goes up. Emily looked over, curious. Like what? A message. For us. For the future. She smiled. Like a secret note inside the walls? Exactly. The next day, they snuck into the unfinished frame and, with a permanent marker, wrote on the beam just behind where the bed would eventually go. May this house never ask us to be anything but our truest selves. They signed it, tucked it away in the walls. A silent promise built into the bones of their future. Emily's father visited the site a few days later. He stood beside her, quietly surveying the space. You know, he said, it's not just a house. I know, she replied. It's a testament. To what? This place is going to hold so much, she whispered. Daniel nodded beside her, tracing patterns in the dust with his finger. Every laugh, every tear, every quiet moment. They wandered through the open rooms, imagining the future unfolding within the walls. Emily pictured mornings spent drinking coffee at the kitchen island, evenings curled up with books by the fireplace, and afternoons watching the seasons change through the big windows. As the weeks went on, the physical labor of building the house became a metaphor for Emily's internal work. She began to notice how her hands, once trembling from anxiety, now felt steady when holding a paintbrush or helping place tiles. Every nail hammered, every wall painted, was a step toward reclaiming the life she was building, not just the structure, but the foundation beneath it. One afternoon, while helping Daniel install the first coat of paint in the living room, Emily paused and ran her hand along the freshly smoothed wall. I can feel it, she said softly, like the house is breathing. Daniel smiled. It is. Just like we are. She laughed, the sound light and free. In the evenings, they often sat on the back porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. One night, Emily pulled out her journal. She wrote, Asterisk roots aren't just about staying put. They're about growing deep enough to weather storms. This house will be more than wood and nails. It will be a home for hope. Asterisk. At the nonprofit, Emily continued to deepen her work, launching new initiatives to support survivors in rebuilding their lives. She shared her journey openly, encouraging others to find their own roots and strength. Her story was no longer just about escape. It was about endurance, about growth, about becoming whole. One day, as she reviewed letters from survivors, Emily found a note that stopped her breath. Thank you for showing me it's okay to build again. Because of you, I found the courage to plant my own roots. Tears blurred her vision. This was why she kept going. Back at the house, Daniel surprised her with a small wooden plaque engraved with their message. May this house never ask us to be anything but our truest selves. They hung it by the front door, a daily reminder of their commitment, not just to each other, but to the life they were creating. As spring deepened into summer, the house neared completion. The garden bloomed with wildflowers and herbs planted by Emily's own hands. She often paused there, taking a deep breath of earth and sky, feeling the fullness of the life she had chosen. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Emily stood by the porch, watching fireflies flicker in the dusk. She thought of the long journey, from brokenness to wholeness, from running to arriving. She smiled, because she knew this wasn't the end. It was just another beginning. Chapter 18. Harvesting What Was Planted. The garden was alive. Vibrant colors burst from every corner, sunflowers swaying gently in the breeze, rows of tomatoes ripening under the summer sun, herbs releasing their fragrant scents into the warm air. Bees hummed lazily, and butterflies flitted from bloom to bloom. Emily knelt beside the raised beds, hands dirty but steady, pulling ripe vegetables from the soil. The simple act grounded her, a tactile reminder of growth and renewal. She held a plump tomato, warm and heavy in her palm, and smiled. This garden was more than just plants. It was a symbol. Inside the house, The walls echoed with laughter as Daniel and Emily prepared dinner from the day's harvest. The kitchen filled with the sounds of chopping, sizzling, and soft music playing on the old radio. This was the harvest of her work, not just the tangible success of the house or book, but the lives touched, the courage ignited, the hope restored. The next morning, Emily attended a community gathering in the nearby town hall. She was there to speak about resilience and rebuilding after trauma. The room was packed with faces eager for guidance, many nodding along as she shared her story. When she finished, a woman in the front row stood, her voice trembling. "Your story gave me the strength to leave. I want to thank you for planting that seed." Emily's heart swelled. Seeds, growth, harvest. The words echoed through her mind, weaving a tapestry of life reclaimed. Back at home, as twilight settled, Emily wandered through the garden, now cool and fragrant. She paused beside a small rosebush, its petals glowing faintly in the moonlight. She remembered the letter she'd buried beneath its roots, the letter to herself, a promise of forgiveness and new beginnings. She reached down, touching the earth softly. "I am here," she whispered. Rooted, growing, whole. Later that week, Daniel surprised her with a small gathering of friends and family to celebrate the house's completion. The backyard buzzed with conversation, children's laughter, and the clink of glasses. Fairy lights twinkled overhead, and the scent of grilled food filled the air. Emily moved through the crowd, feeling the warmth of connection surround her. Her parents hugged her tightly, pride shining in their eyes. Sarah toasted to new beginnings, and Daniel, standing beside her, caught her hand and smiled. As the night deepened, Emily stood alone on the porch, gazing at the stars. The journey had been long, winding, sometimes dark, but here she was, harvesting the life she had planted, and ready to keep growing. Chapter 19. Branches that reach. The early morning light spilled softly across the wooden floors of the house. Growth doesn't always look like leaps. Sometimes it's just reaching for the next moment. That evening, Daniel joined her in the garden. They sat on the porch swing, the air fragrant with blooming jasmine. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, "about the idea of legacy." Emily turned to him, curious. What kind of roots do we want to leave? What branches do we want to grow that will reach beyond us? She considered this. "I want to build something that outlives pain, that grows love, not fear, that gives others a place to belong." Daniel smiled. "Then let's make sure everything we build, this house, our work, our lives, reaches toward that." Weeks later, Emily received a message from a publisher about a new opportunity, a collaborative project to create a podcast featuring stories of survival and resilience. It was daunting, but exciting. She thought about the branches, how they reach, how they bend, how they grow toward light even after storms. She squeezed Daniel's hand. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." He smiled. "Me too." Together, they walked forward, roots deep, branches wide, ready to face the future. Chapter 20. The Garden of Tomorrow. Spring had returned to Seattle, painting the city in fresh greens and soft blossoms. Emily stood in the garden behind their house, now fully grown into a sanctuary of flowers, herbs, and fruit trees. The scent of lilacs mingled with earth and sunshine. She breathed deeply, savoring the moment, the culmination of years of hard work, healing, and hope. This garden was more than a space. It was a testament. Emily's phone buzzed with a message from one of the podcast listeners, a woman who wrote about finally leaving an abusive relationship after hearing Emily's voice on the show. "Your story gave me strength to start over. Thank you for helping me believe." Tears pricked at Emily's eyes. She had never imagined her journey would touch so many lives. Later that day, Daniel joined her in the garden, carrying a small sapling. "I thought we could plant this here," he said, kneeling beside her. It was a young maple tree, its leaves just beginning to unfurl. Emily nodded, helping him dig a small hole. "This tree will grow strong," Daniel said. "And so will we." As they worked, Emily reflected on the seasons of her life, the winters of despair, the springs of growth, the summers of joy, and even the autumns of letting go. She realized healing was cyclical, not linear, a constant tending to the self. That evening, at a community event hosted in their home, Emily shared her story with new friends and neighbors. She spoke of resilience, self-love, and the courage to build anew. Her words were met with nods, smiles, and tears. She saw in their eyes the same spark she once sought in herself. After the event, as guests departed, Daniel took her hand. "We're building more than a home," he said. "We're building a legacy." Emily smiled, heart full. "We're growing a garden for tomorrow." That night, as she journaled by the window, Emily wrote, "The garden of tomorrow is planted today, with seeds of courage, watered by hope and nurtured by love. And I am ready to watch it grow." Chapter 21. New Roots. New Wings. The morning sun poured through the windows of the nearly finished house, casting warm light across unpacked boxes and fresh paint. Emily stood at the threshold, taking it all in. This place was more than walls and roof. It was the space where she could finally breathe freely. Daniel handed her a steaming cup of coffee. "Ready for the first night?" Emily smiled, feeling a mix of excitement and calm. More than ever, as they moved boxes and arranged furniture, Emily thought back to the journey that brought her here, from fear and pain to hope and healing. Each choice, each step, had rooted her deeper into herself. She set down a photo frame on the mantel. A picture of her parents, Daniel, and herself, all smiling under a blossoming tree. "We're home," she whispered. Later that evening, they sat on the porch swing, wrapped in blankets. The stars glittered above like promises. Daniel looked at her with quiet affection. "You've grown so much." Emily nodded. "I've learned that roots don't hold you back. They give you the strength to soar." He smiled. New roots, new wings. The next morning, Emily began drafting the outline for her third book, a memoir of transformation and self-empowerment. This time, the story wasn't just hers. It was for everyone still searching for their own wings. Weeks later, at a community festival, Emily spoke on a panel about healing and resilience. The crowd listened intently as she shared her experiences and insights. Afterwards, a young woman approached her. "I'm just beginning to leave," she said nervously. "Your story gives me hope." Emily took her hand gently. "You're stronger than you know. And you're not alone." Emily felt a profound peace settle within her. Her story was still unfolding, with new roots to ground her, and wings to carry her forward. Chapter 22. The Light She Carries. The morning light spilled gently through the curtains, casting a soft glow over Emily's writing desk. The quiet hum of the city waking up was a soothing backdrop as she typed the final paragraphs of her latest manuscript. Her fingers moved steadily across the keyboard, each word carrying the weight and wisdom of her journey. This book was different, not just a story of survival, but a beacon for others searching for their own path out of darkness. Later that day, Emily received an unexpected invitation to speak at a national conference on trauma recovery and empowerment. The honor was humbling and a testament to how far she had come. She prepared with care, wanting to share not only her pain but the hope and strength that had blossomed from it. On the day of the conference, standing under bright lights before hundreds of attendees, Emily felt a deep calm. She spoke openly about the long road from heartbreak to healing, the power of self-love, and the courage it takes to reclaim one's life. Her words resonated deeply, echoing beyond the room, reaching hearts she had yet to meet. Afterward, a woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "Your story gave me the courage to leave," she whispered. "Thank you for being the light I needed." Emily held her hand, feeling the profound connection of shared experience. That evening, back at home, Daniel met her with a warm embrace. "You carry a light that shines far beyond this house," he said softly. Emily smiled, resting her head against his chest. "I'm just grateful to finally be the one holding the flame." Today marked the 1-year anniversary of moving into the house she and Daniel had built together. It was more than just a home. It was a symbol of resilience, hope, and the future they had chosen. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift with each heartbeat. She was no longer defined by the pain she had endured, but by the life she was creating. Daniel joined her on the porch, handing her a cup of warm tea. He smiled softly. "To new beginnings," he said. Emily clinked her cup against his. "To the promise of tomorrow." Inside, the walls echoed with laughter as friends and family gathered for a small celebration. Stories were shared, memories made, and love woven into every moment. Emily looked around the room, her heart full. She thought of the long journey, the heartbreak, the healing, the growth. And she knew, with unwavering certainty, that this was just the beginning. Later that night, as the stars sparkled overhead, Emily sat quietly by the window, pen in hand. She wrote, "The past will always be a part of me, but it no longer controls me. I carry my story with grace, knowing it has shaped but not defined me. Tomorrow is unwritten, full of promise, possibility, and light. And I am ready to live it." With a peaceful smile, Emily closed her journal. The future awaited, bright, open, and hers to shape. Chapter 24. The journey continues. Emily stood at the edge of the garden, the warm breeze gently tugging at her hair. The maple tree they had planted years ago stood tall and strong, its leaves shimmering in the sunlight like a quiet celebration of growth and resilience. She traced her fingers along its bark, feeling the rough texture beneath her palm, a reminder that strength often comes from enduring hardship and weathering storms. The past was never far from her thoughts, but it no longer held power over her. Instead, it had become a foundation, a fertile ground from which she could continue to grow. Her life was no longer defined by fear or silence, but by choice, courage, and love. Inside the house, Daniel prepared dinner while Emily set the table. The space was filled with the comforting sounds of sizzling food and soft music playing from the speakers. They shared stories from their day, the small victories, the quiet moments, the laughter. This was their life now, built slowly, intentionally, with care. Later, as twilight settled over the city, Emily opened her laptop to respond to messages from readers and survivors who had reached out after hearing her story. Each message was a thread in the tapestry of connection she had helped weave, a community of healing and hope. She felt humbled and grateful to be part of it. After closing the laptop, Emily and Daniel stepped outside to the porch. They sat together, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars emerge one by one. Daniel reached for her hand. "No matter what comes next," he said softly, "we'll face it together." Emily squeezed his hand, her heart full. "Yes," she whispered. "The journey continues." She looked up at the night sky, feeling a deep sense of peace and possibility. Emily had come to understand that forgiveness was not about letting someone else off the hook. It was a gift she gave to herself. A release. She set the letter down and looked out at the garden beyond, where flowers bloomed resiliently despite the storms. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, she thought. Forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves. Not because they deserve it, but because we deserve freedom. A heart that forgives is a heart that lives. She whispered softly to herself. Thank you, life, for the chance to love and forgive. Runs his own investment